let's just go ahead and start with name, age, where you grew up, and
Okay.
a little bit about your background.
Okay. My name is Kenneth Kurtz, Kurtz. I was born in Arcola, the second house west of the school, and then the reason I was born there is my grandparents retired, and my mother had to take care of them. And then when they passed away, my folks bought a farm out on the Felger Road, about 3/4 of a mile north of Arcola. And my mother was a Felger, so I'm related to many Felgers yet in this area. And so we lived on the farm, and it was a big change because my grandparents' house was modern, with bathroom facilities and running water and all that stuff. And we moved out in the country where we had a well, and so you had to carry in the water and no electricity. So we had lanterns at night. And then in about 1937 or 8, we got electricity so that at least we had, you could turn on the lights in the different rooms, but then we didn't have modern plumbing until my dad built a new house in 1940, and so that was great. And so then I went to Arcola High School, graduated in 1947, so that makes me 95 years old. And then I was, my dad, he kind of asked me what I wanted to do, and I told him, well, I either wanted to farm or to go to Purdue. And he says, well, if you want to farm, there's no use going to Purdue. You better get a job so that you can purchase a farm. And then I happened to get in it. It was Farnsworth Radio and Television. And I had actually been working on construction when they were building the Dana plant as a laborer. But then that fall, I think it was 1948, it was a real wet fall, and we had to help the guy that had the sewage contract. He was out in Iowa, but he was behind mostly because the weather was bad. And you'd try to get a shovel full of dirt, and it would be a shovel full of mud, and it was slow progress. And so every time we'd get a rainy day, I would go out to the East End Industries to see if they would have an opening. Dana wasn't hiring anybody right then that had not been in the military. And I'd go out, but I never thought I could get a job at Farnsworth Radio and Television. Well, then finally one day I stopped in there, and after I didn't have any success at the other industries, and they asked me if I could start tomorrow. So I started out on an assembly line, assembling cathode ray tubes in fancy television sets. And then at Christmas time, I got laid off, and about 6 weeks later, they asked me if I would work in the tube lab, and we bought the blanks, and I sealed cathode ray guns in the tubes. And then about the time that, then we got into military tubes, where we got a contract for the, I can't think of the name of it, but it was for the tubes the small tubes for on the night vision goggles for, and the ones we started building were for on the M1 rifles, you know. And anyhow, that we had a lot of rejects to get there. Well, then I got a draft call, and on March of 1950. Well, I knew when the Korean War started that I would probably get called up pretty soon. So, but I kept on working at Farnsworth Radio. Well, then, I don't know, about 1949, ITT had bought out Farnsworth, and then we started a defense division, and then they had Farnsworth had the assembly lines where they continued to build television sets, and Farnsworth had actually invented the television, but one of the problems that he had is he got his license or patent right at the start of World War II, and then the time was up about the time the war ended, and so RCA was his big competitor, and it was pretty difficult to make a profit against RCA. So I think about 1956, ITT changed everything over to defense products. But when I was drafted in March of 1951, there was 55 of us from Fort Wayne and Allen County that were drafted at the same time. And most of us went up to Fort Custer, Michigan. I think probably all of us did. And then we, after our processing, most of us were sent out to Fort Riley, Kansas for infantry training. And part of the Fort Riley campus was another training camp called Camp Funston. And so that's where most of us that went from Fort Wayne, we were put in with enough people to make a company, a lot of them from Detroit, some from southern Indiana, and then guys from all over to make the quantity of people needed for the training company. And so we had 14 weeks of infantry basic, and we were the last group that had 14 weeks because they thought that what they needed in Korea then was replacements, because a lot of the guys had been there from the start of the Korean War, were eligible to rotate. And so, but then they figured that people could use a little more training. So after our cycle was completed, the people that had to go through basic training for infantry had to take 16 weeks of basic training. And then I guess we graduated last June, and most of us, well, we would get a 10-day leave, and most of us were scheduled to go to Korea. So we got a 10-day leave, reported back to Fort Lewis, in Washington, outside of Seattle, Washington. And then we were, those group that we went through basic with were advanced party. So we got scheduled for KP for the trip to Japan. And so every other day we had to do KP. And then after they got the KP numbers filled, well, then the next group come on, got guard duty, and then they got guard duty every other day. But the guard duty was easier than the KP. We'd get up at 4 in the morning and get 2 meals served, a breakfast and a dinner, and we'd get done about 10 at night. And then we'd get a day off, and then we'd be back on the next day. And then the ship we were on was the General Pope, and I can't remember how many people were on there, but there was also a lot of Air Force lieutenants, primarily going over that had completed their training and were going to serve in the Air Force. And so we landed at Yokohama, and then we went to Camp Drake for reassignment. And again, most of us were assigned to Korea, and we, like when we went through basic training, we had 2 of everything, but then like we had to leave 1 set of everything at Camp Drake, like a set of boots and half of your gear. But I was issued a new carbine when I got to Yokohama. And then so that was a good deal, because when I got to Korea, I was assigned as an ammo bearer. And so I had buddies that, like Morris Grimm, he just lived a couple miles from me, and we'd gone to school together and everything. And he was assigned to Fox Company of the 35th Infantry Regiment, and I was assigned to George Company, which was the next company down. But then I was very fortunate. We were, after about a month, one day, we were stringing barbed wire, and it was kind of like back in blocking position. And about mid-afternoon, somebody came and says, "Ken, I'm supposed to take you back to company headquarters." I get back to headquarters, and they said, "Ken, I got to take you back to service company." And then I get back to service company, and they said, "Well, you're supposed to stay here tonight." And there was another guy by the name of Harry Nelson, who was also, but he was from St. Louis, but he was someplace in the same regiment that I was. So we get back that evening, or we stay overnight, and then when I get back there the next day, I find out that the assistant machine gunner that I was teamed up with as an ammo bearer, he had gotten killed by a mortar round that night. So I would have probably either been, if not killed, probably wounded, because in the buddy system, like he and I were close together, and the machine gunner and the other ammo bearer were close together. And so I get back there, and I'm, I asked them, how did I get selected? And they said, well, we needed somebody with good math that could type. And so that's why I was selected, because my assignment was to, the clerk for Medic Company was going to rotate in a couple of weeks. And the records for Medic Company were all screwed up, because, and so my assignment was to start getting them straightened out as soon as I could, because the first sergeant from Medic Company would want to promote somebody, and they'd say, well, okay, you can't promote anybody, your quota is filled. And so I had to go back through the records, and at least by the time the other guy rotated, then I could take over his duties as a clerk for a medic company, and the first sergeant, then he could start promoting some people, because I would have enough of the people worked out so that there would be some vacancies at each category. What was happening, it seems like way back in the beginning, somebody would get wounded or killed or maybe even rotated, and they'd not drop the person out of the company, but they would bring in a replacement, and that seemed to be what had happened. Of course, I could understand early in the war, the clerk out on the line with the other medics, but could make mistakes. So then they said, the first sergeant said I should be promoted. And of course, they said, well, we don't have any openings in headquarters. So he said, assign me to medic company. And so I got a promotion to PFC then. And then after about 3 months, the guy that was in charge of the, he was called the personnel leader for the 2nd Battalion. And so they wanted me to take the job, and then I would get a promotion. But so the first sergeant said, well, keep me in medic company and we'll promote you as long as, they could promote me as long as I was the personnel leader, not only for the 2nd Battalion, but medic company. And so that's the way I spent most of my time in Korea, working for back at division headquarters as a section leader or supervisor, and being on TDY to medic company. And then, and since I worked back there, I got to kind of keep tabs on some of the other guys. And Maury Grimm, who was still in the Fox unit, he and I were able to go on R&R together. And one of the things, Morris Grimm, he was a real neat soldier, besides being a good soldier. And so when Ridgway come up, to investigate the line and everything, like he got to be his personal guard, that traveled with him, which was quite an honor. And so,
where was the headquarters located at?
Okay, when I joined headquarters, it was at an airfield, not an airfield, athletic field just outside of Yongdong-Po. And I think Yongdong-Po is probably about 10 miles from Seoul. And we were there from the time I joined until I think it was maybe April. So I joined there in September, I guess, and we were at Yongdong-Po to April, and then we moved up near Chunchan, which was you could always see a lot of mountains, and especially from Yongdong-Po, but we had more level ground when we went up to the Chunchan area. And that's where I rotated from Korea after spending a year in Korea. And then we got 30 days. Well, what I was able to do, since I was in personnel, as I said, we had to do KP on the way over, and I thought, man, if there's another way, I'm not going to do that on the way home. And since I was in personnel then, and actually I was a sergeant by that time, so I was able to process rotatees and then get on flight orders to come home. And so I worked there about 3 weeks and got flight orders home, and then I processed some of the same people at Camp Stoneman as I did in Japan. And then we got our 30-day leave, and then I got assigned to Camp Atterbury to finish. Actually, I was first assigned to the 38th Infantry Regiment, but then they found out, that I had worked in personnel, so I got assigned to the personnel group, the 5th Army headquarters, processing people to go on leave and figuring out their rations, payment, and stuff like that. And then I was discharged in December of 1952.
So you did almost just over a full year then, right?
2 years.
2 years, yeah. 52.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, not quite 2 years. Yeah.
And so you achieved rank of sergeant, which was that E4?
E5.
E5.
Yeah.
It's pretty good for 2 years.
Right?
It's pretty good for 2 years.
Yeah. Yes, it was. And that's like I got a brother-in-law was in the Navy, and he couldn't figure out how some of us got promoted so soon. But people, as they rotated, you took their place, and then you got their rank. Yeah. So that was the difference in being in the Navy for 4 years.
You said you spent quite a bit of time in Japan, in Yokohama. This is 1951. What was it like in Japan just so many years after World War II?
Well, I thought, man, what a place. It's still pretty desolate in places. And but then when I went to Korea, that was a real shock, because like that athletic field, everything around it was pretty much destroyed. And so I don't know where all these orphans came from, but when we'd get up and go out in the morning, our fence would be all lined with orphans wanting, some kind of a handout if they could get it. And the chaplains, one of their jobs was, I think, to try to get these orphans back into orphanages. And and then we had 2 houseboys back at headquarters for our personnel unit, and I guess about every other personnel unit had some. And their names was Kim Il-hung and Lee Von Wook, I think. But those guys were really, I suppose they were about 10 years old, but they were really good workers. And the Korean people were hardworking, and it was amazing, how they had to live, and was still able to fight with our. We had a company of ROKs, Republic of Korea soldiers, attached to us, and then a brigade of Turks too over there in Korea, and they were a good fighting outfit also.
What was the general sentiment amongst the South Korean people about the Americans being there? Were they happy? They appreciate?
Oh, they were grateful to us. Yeah.
And you were talking earlier about your friend that you would go on some R&R.
Mm-hmm.
What are some things that you were able to do while in Korea?
Japan. Oh,
in Korea, what?
oh,
Or either one, actually. So.
well, about the only thing I ever did in Korea was when we was back at Yongdo. Well, there was an air base at Suwon, and one Sunday we got a day off, and me and a couple other guys got a permit to go to Suwon Air Base because they had a PX there. And another thing, though, that I remember, we were going to start an NCO club at headquarters. So when you go on R&R, everybody would bring back a case of Canadian Club or something like that. And then we had a stash, and then we was going to start this NCO club. And then when we got ready to move, we couldn't take that with us. And so a lot of the guys got pretty soused. And that didn't help the move that much. But yeah, so somebody wound up with a lot of booze after we left.
What was the living conditions like there in Korea? Were you intense in Korea too?
Yeah, when we were in kind of blocking position, we had those little pup tents that two people could share, and so then and then we had some not dugouts, but well, I can't think of the name now. I'm getting forgetful, but we would have holes, dug that we could stay in, but and then that's what the people on the line had, and then they had, as the winter came on, they had bunkers that they had built, and then when I moved back to division headquarters, we had tents that we worked in, and would have generators for power for in the work tents, and then we had other tents where we had a cot and would stay, and then in the wintertime back there, we'd have a Korean Papa San see if he could find us a door someplace, and then he'd make a door in front of our working tent so we could keep it heated better, and worked there.
What was the weather like while you were there? You did a whole
Okay,
year
this
there,
was the
a couple years
second
there.
winter, so it was still cold most of the times. Got down, not as cold as the guys were in the first winter, but it would be 10 degrees quite often. And
Did you feel like you had the equipment you needed?
yeah, pretty much enough to stay warm, and yeah, we back there. Well, I guess by that time the guys on the line had a pretty good winter year. Like on the first year, while a lot of them had frozen toes and fingers, and yeah, or by the time we were there, I think most of them were pretty well supplied.
What would you say kind of was the overall sentiment of all the guys that were over there? Were they happy to be there? Did they feel like?
I would say that most of them that we weren't happy, but they felt that it was their duty. And then, but like back at division headquarters, we have a guy complain too much, so they send him on errands, and if he'd get up to the front line, well, he'd figure he had it pretty good. So I was only about one guy I remember that actually had gotten transferred up there, because after they got back where we were, they could feel that they were pretty lucky to be back there.
How were you paid? It wasn't direct deposit, was it?
Okay, well, and I might have some Korean script. They say we didn't need much, so maybe we'd, unless you were one of the guys that like to gamble, say I would need $15 I'd like to have, then I'd send the rest home as an allotment for my dad to invest. Well, yeah. And when we got drafted, I think we received $80 a month, and then about the time I left the line or the rifle company, I think they instituted an extra $50 a month for the people that were on line duty, and then I think we got like $10 overseas pay, but I was making about $140 a month then after I made sergeant, and I think I made sergeant in May and rotated in July, and then by the time I got back to the States, so all I lost was the overseas pay, which is probably $10 a month.
So with the scripts, could you borrow against your paycheck, or was it taken out of that paycheck?
Well, we signed for our money, and then if I wanted $15 cash, I get $15 in scripts.
Okay. Yeah. And everything else was sent home then.
Yeah.
Okay. Was there much to spend in town, or was it all on base at the BX?
The only time I got to go to the PX in Korea was when we went over to Suwon Air Base.
So you said you went over with 51 others from Allen County. Do you know of that group? Did they all make it back?
I think we all did. One of the guys, Richard Gripke, that lived down here at Hadley, he wanted to get home sooner, so he did not go on R&R, but then he got wounded by staying there, and so he got home sooner than he anticipated. But now some of the guys that we took basic with, I think there was a kid from Detroit got killed, and a couple others.
Are there any of those guys that you still stay in touch with at all?
The only guy that I know is Dale Lawrence, and he lives over in Whitley County. And that is kind of another situation. When I went to the rifle company, I thought Dale Lawrence and Bill Lamping were going to go to L Company. So when I get back to service company, hey, you guys back here. And Dale Lawrence says, well, they said L Company was filled up and they didn't need us at that time. So Bill Lamping heard that they needed a couple cooks. And he says, Dale and I are not cooks, but we could sure learn. So they took those guys back there as cooks. And so they lucked out because L Company, I was surprised, said they was full because they seem to have the most problems. So they have new rotaties, and it seemed like the Chinese knew that and would try to hit them the hardest.
So how far back from the front lines was the headquarters?
Oh, I suppose maybe 15 miles.
Did you spend any time at all on the line?
Only there when we would have a couple of exercises to get up there, and so in case we had to go, I mean, we didn't know that it was just going to be exercise, but they wanted to see how soon we could get up there, I guess.
You talked about the food. How was the food? How often did you get it? Was it all hot meals?
Back at division headquarters, most of it was hot meals. Now the guys, even when I was up with the line, we'd have mostly C rations. Or I mean, when I was with the rifle company, we'd have C rations. And then when they were on line, they'd have C rations and K rations. But once in a while, then they would try to get them up a hot meal.
Any of the food that you liked or
Oh,
that you remember especially?
I can remember one day it was raining, and we got mashed potatoes and then some peaches, and they slapped the peaches on the mashed potatoes, and but yeah.
Overall, decent food though.
What's that?
Was the food overall decent, or?
In my case, it was.
Yeah.
Now, some of the guys on the line, they had differences of opinion, I guess, because I could get tired of C rations and K rations.
So what were your thoughts on kind of the political aspect of the war and kind of?
Well, I guess when MacArthur said the guys are going to be home by Christmas, of course I wasn't even in then, but then when a lot of guys called it Truman's War, but then when he fired MacArthur, I would say a lot of the guys felt that that was a good thing that we were getting Ridgeway to take over. But I know all the people back home still thought that MacArthur was a great general.
So from the war, what do you think? You're looking back all these years now later. What would you say is the legacy? You know, sometimes the Korean War is referred to as the forgotten war. What is the legacy? What do we need to remember?
I think most Korean vets feel that we were doing the right thing, stopping communism, and some were thought maybe we should not have signed the armistice, but I think everybody that was in was very glad to have that armistice signed, so that even though there's been hostilities off and on and some people occasionally get killed, I know that all of the guys that I served with was glad to get out. But they felt they had done, most of them felt they'd done their job.
So I'm a teacher. I teach, the Korean War.
Mhm.
What is it that you think the most important thing for students to know about that period?
I think it's to know that, here was a country that we did not know hardly anything about, and that we had people that were willing to try to keep the North Koreans and Chinese and even the Russians. They had their MiGs, and I think Russians were really the ones that probably instigated it, but then the Chinese were the one that had to fight and take the casualties. But the Russians did have their MiG fighters initially.
Anything else you want to add?
No, except I felt that God was with me, because I was going. I probably, if I wouldn't have been killed, I'd probably been wounded, and then I mentioned that there was a Harry Nelson went back with me, and he was very fortunate because he couldn't type and they didn't really have an opening then. So, but then they had made one in supply so that he didn't have to go back up online. And then they got to write Nelson back about 3 weeks later. So, and he survived the war too then, So that was something. And they talked about shows, coming over, but as far as I know, any of us guys that took basic together, I don't think any of us ever saw a show, even though they had these, what do they call them? Well, anyhow, these troops would come over and you'd hear about them, like Bob Hope was a regular. And,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
But-
you didn't have any USO shows that were
No,
not where you were at?
no.
Well, that was all the questions that I had. I think we went through those.
Okay.